Most of us, when we start using AI, we go to GPT or Claude, we just ask things. What we'll be showing today is something that takes a step further. Instead of you deciding what to upload and when, we look at how to set up something where the context is always there. The data is loaded in the background every time you ask something so that you never have to think about it. It's about what happens when the data lives in the same place as the conversation. Building something real that makes a difference to your everyday job or everyday life. It is not complicated these days. Hi everyone, I'm Andrea. I'm a strategy management consultant and I write the Art of Asking Questions on Substack.
So I am going to be letting Andrea take the lead here on this live stream. I'm going to be a student. I'm going to sit back and ask questions, and I think that kind of matches the art of asking questions here. So what are we looking at, Andrea, today?
Today we are going to run quite a practical session. So there's a dashboard setup that we want to show you, and this is going to be a downloadable resource that we'll share later. So this is entirely free to download. And the reason why I want to talk about this is that most of us, when we start using AI, we go to ChatGPT or Claude, we just ask things. You upload something or you put some information, you ask questions of it, and that works really well. People have got very good at it in many cases. But what we'll be showing today is something that takes a step further. So instead of you deciding what to upload and when, we look at how to set up something where the context is always there. So the data is loaded in the background every time you ask something so that you never have to think about it and you can focus on the questions that you have and the insight that you can get out of that. And the reason we structure this around the dashboard in particular is that quite often when you have data, you need to see it. So you're not quite sure. So what's interesting about it? What question can I ask about this data? So say you notice a spike in a chart. Is that interesting? And so by looking at the data, you can then also decide what questions to ask of it. And nowadays, chatbots have very good visualization capabilities. So some of this is arguably also possible in a regular chat, but not in the reliable and repeatable way that we'll see today, and not without persistent context. So this is very much not about replacing what people do with chatbots. It's about what happens when the data lives in the same place as the conversation. So that's what we look at how to build today.
Awesome. So basically, we're going to be looking at a dashboard with a chatbot in it. Does that sound right?
That's absolutely right. So let me
Let's
put
see
it
it.
on screen so that you can all see it. So there it is. So you should be able to see my screen. As you can see, this is a live weather forecast. And you can see a number of charts here, all with their helpful tooltips and additional information. This is updated as of today. And what I wanted to say is that this setup is something that brings the data into the system. It draws the chart for you and then has a chat window you can see on the right hand side where you can ask questions. This is set up to use Claude AI to answer your questions. And what I want to show is just how simple the setup behind this is. There are 4 files that we look at. That's it. No database, no complicated setup. There are no API keys. So you just run one command and this opens in your browser. And I wanted to show you, before we look at anything further, what is the ingredient into this whole thing. And there you go. This is the data that we'll be using. This is pretty horrendous, but there's nothing that you need to do about it. This is data from a free weather service. It's called Open Meteo. You don't need an account. You don't need to sign up. You just paste the address that you can see here at the top of the page. I'll share it later, but you just paste this address in your browser and you see the information. So there's in here, you might see this temperature, humidity, wind speed, 7 days of forecast, all of it. And this blob of numbers is what we're working at. And so this is what we'll process, what we'll visualize, and what we will interrogate using AI.
Yeah, it's hilarious for anybody that just hopped in the stream to just this is the first thing they see.
Let's go back to the pretty one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about how you would go about building something like this, or at least what I typically do. So for a demo like this, I tend to start with the list of files. And I mean that quite literally. So before I write a single line of code, or more specifically, before I ask Claude to write a single line of code, I try to name the files, because if I can't describe the whole project, especially something simple, in a handful of file names, it's already too complicated for others to take and reuse. So my purpose here was to build something that everybody listening could download and then adapt for whatever they want. And there is a discipline to this. So every time you add a file, you are adding something that someone has to understand before they change anything. So for this, I try to keep to the minimum that actually works. This project has 4 files. And let me see if I can actually share a different window now. There you go. So you should be able to see my Visual Studio Code now. So you can see here that there are 4 files. So we're looking at this panel to the left. So run.py is the start button. That's the only file you ever need to touch if you're only using this. So you play that file and the dashboard runs. There's a data manager.py that goes and gets the weather. So that very ugly file, it picks it up and it does something with it. Then chat.py is for chatting to Claude, quite literally. And dashboard.html is what's in the browser. So that's the pretty visual. And there are also 2 data files in a dedicated folder. One is with hourly forecast and the other one with the daily ones. And that's it. So what I like about this as a starting point for people is that each file does exactly one thing and the name tells you what that thing is. So you don't need to read the code to get a rough idea of how it works. And in my experience, that's a habit that's worth building early when you develop code, especially if you do it like myself in your free time. So if you can't pick a name for a file clearly, it usually means that the file is trying to do too many things.
Interesting. Interesting. So basically, so you showed us that it almost looked like an alien code where all the weather gets in, right? And so how does this go from like a spreadsheet to something that you can see in the browser?
So that is the data manager dot py. Let me open it up for you. So you can see in this file, hard coded, this is the URL that takes you to that very ugly string of numbers. And this file is, I don't know, 83 lines. It's a very short file in terms of software development. And most of it you can possibly see from here that it's about translating the data in that ugly file into something that's more readable. And in fact, what you get out of this file is this. So this is the information you could see in that website, in that URL, in CSV format. So essentially a table. So we've got the hourly and the daily weather. Yeah, there's nothing special about it, right? This is just a plain spreadsheet that has been derived from that pretty awful string of numbers. So I'll
Yeah,
stop sharing for a bit now as we continue talking.
sure. I think it's right now we're talking about the weather, right? So my couple questions for you. One, what else could this be used for in general research? Really, if pretty seems like pretty much anything. And I think this just also shows you like our human eyes and brain wants to see something more cohesive, comprehensive, and something that we can actually use, right? Now, even that, those columns of the weather, right? So obviously anybody could go into Claude or ChatGPT and ask it to draw some numbers in regards to weather in a certain area or location. So what kind of separates this from that specifically?
So with this type of setup, you can do pretty much whatever you want. So this is set up to analyze the weather. So what is specific to the weather here is the data harvesting element. So the API that is being used brings in weather information. So naturally, it will create those 2 CSV files that are about weather information. But if you had a different data source, where I work, we have a project management, company management system that has an API. I could stream data from that into this sort of setup and do things with it. I don't know, do a project planner, or it really depends on the data that you've got. It could be about being, it could be about grocery shopping, really whatever you want, as long as you have some data. And on top of that, there's no need for the data to sit on the internet. So at the moment, it's using an API to grab data from the internet live and then show it. But if you want to do something that only uses data that's on your computer locally, or say a spreadsheet or whatever that you manually update over time, then you could do that as well. The other thing to mention is that the dashboard, so the HTML file, so that's a visual, a set of visuals actually. And what's special about it is they are visuals about the weather. So if you showed any other sort of data, the visuals will need to be adapted to show whatever other information you wanted to cover. But that said, I almost did not touch the code that Claude wrote. So if you wanted to adapt this to do something else, unless you were going somewhere incredibly complex, yeah, you can get AI to adapt this code or this type of setup to do whatever it is that you want to do. Did I answer all of your question? There were a
Yeah.
few.
Yeah, but I think to just expand on it for a second, like I found
Mhm.
that when doing research sometimes, like for example, I've recently tried to do some research into public markets. And I will just preface this by saying if anybody's Andre and I have spoken about investing before, not too much on a podcast, but just to throw this in there, 'cause I think this applies here. I've tried to do some research before, and it feels sometimes as if even with the latest models, that it's pretty tough to get real time data. And so what you're showing us here is, yeah, you might have to go and extract that real time data separately, but then you can actually insert it into this dashboard and then work from there. Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way it's set up now, so this specific piece of software is that when you launch it, it downloads data off the internet and it shows it to you. But the way this can be set up is also as you could also use services. So you have code that keeps running in the background and keeps grabbing data from the internet at regular intervals. I don't say every 5 minutes or every minute or every 3 seconds, or whatever it is you like and whatever is allowed by the data source, which is usually a limitation. But yeah, if you had, I don't know, three, five, 10 sources, reputable sources of financial information or marketplace information, you could very easily create a chart that keeps moving across your screen as time goes by with the appropriate, say, line charts that go up and down. So yeah, 100% this can be done.
Interesting. So if anybody here watching wants to try this, like what do they need to start?
It's a few different things because essentially when you want to so this works with an HTML file. So HTML files run in your browser, and your browser is, because of security reasons, is not allowed to simply load up data that's on your computer. The CSV files that I showed you in the preview, yeah, your browser is simply not allowed to open them. So for this to run, you need a server. So the server plays the role of the intermediary that brings the information, or takes the information from your device and passes it on to the browser. What I use here is a tiny framework that's called Flask. And you can see it a bit as the waiter. So the browser comes in and asks for something, which is the page, the weather data, and the replies from Claude, which, by the way, I should demo in a minute. And then Flask goes and gets it and brings it back. And so, yeah, that's the first thing that you need. And then the other main thing that you need is Python. So Python is the programming language that runs this full pipeline. And the final thing is Claude Code. This uses Claude to answer questions. And so you need, especially because this uses on your computer through Claude Code that sits on your computer as opposed to the web interface, you need a paid subscription to Claude. But you could also set this up to run with the local large language model, which is something that you and I have talked about in a previous video. So let me actually pop a link to that previous video into the chat. So if anybody's interested in exploring how to use local large language models, that's also very much a possibility. So would you like me to give a quick demo of what the Q&A functionality does? What does it look like?
That was my next question. Absolutely. I'd love to see this in real time.
Great. So yeah, hopefully it won't be one of those epic fails where things fail at the last minute. So there we go. So I am sharing my screen. Right. So you should be able to see the dashboard again. So
Yep.
yeah, let's close the unappealing version of it. The way I set this up is that there are some demo questions that are embedded in here. So you can just click what's the weather like tomorrow. And this is interface with Claude Code. So we need to give it a moment because unlike a regular chat, this is passing into Claude all of the background information that you have in this project. So it's the data files, but also the code. Because I set this up as an educational tool, you can also ask it, how does this code work? And it will go and look at the code and answer. So that burns a lot of tokens, and passing tens or hundreds of lines of code into Claude is not a good idea on average, but here for educational purposes, it makes sense. Anyway, let's look at the response. So as you can see here, we've got, let's go back to the top. We've got temperature, precipitations. Oh, it's going to rain in the morning. So this is about Rome. I live in Nottingham, but my family is in Rome. So I thought, let's think about better weather. And it tells you about the wind, total precipitation, a little bit of everything, based on the data that's been provided. So it's looking at all of the data and giving us a good summary. And especially, it's a wet morning with possible thunderstorm, clear into a pleasant and warm afternoon. Okay, that sounds nice. And a nice recommendation about what to bring with you. And because as I was saying, this also receives the data, so the code is an input alongside the data. It can also explain exactly how things work. And yeah, I won't read this because it will repeat exactly what I told you so far. But yeah, this also explain how it works. So if you download this after a conversation and you wonder how could I do this, how does it work, you can ask it directly. But as I said, you would need Claude to make that work.
Interesting. Interesting. So yeah, I think to me, like the most special thing here is the real time data, which I think just shows people like I guess where you're actually getting that data from matters probably more than anything. So when you're building something like this, which is very visually appealing, it could mislead you in the wrong direction if you're inputting the wrong data, right?
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I think the key with these things, especially because AI tends to embellish everything in both visual form and in the narration of it in its responses. And so, yeah, it is absolutely crucial that you pick a data source that you trust. I have not checked the accuracy of this API. I know it's a reputable API, but is it accurate? Is it correct? I wouldn't know about that. And for the purpose of a demo, that's absolutely fine. But if you're looking at anything more consequential, then you do need to be a bit more careful. For example, in the UK, there's a lot of open government data. So data that the government makes available about public services, transports, and that sort of stuff. And if you find open government data, I think you can generally trust it, especially if it's not politically charged or nobody's trying to trick you in terms of what bus is going to reach this stop and when. But yeah, if you're doing anything more consequential, you do need to be quite careful. And naturally, the interpretation of the data can be quite tricky as well. So because the weather is fairly objective, if the UV index is above this number, you should wear sunscreen. Pretty straightforward. But if you put in some complex data with a number of interactions between columns and rows, for example, it's also good practice to tell the AI what are potential formulas to analyze them, or what are appropriate statistics to apply to that data. For example, you wouldn't want to apply a form of statistical analysis that is not appropriate to the data you're putting in, because otherwise you'll be completely misled. So yeah, there are quite a lot of potential traps there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really important to note, especially for somebody like you who's in consulting. You need to make sure that you dot your I's and you cross your T's. Have you used anything like this in your professional work?
Yes, it's not quite the same, but yeah, along similar approach. So, for example, as a consultants, for anybody who doesn't know this, consultants essentially sell their time. each project has a budget, has got a capacity plan. You've got a certain amount of time that you are allowed to spend on that project, and the project needs to be profitable. So what you're charging the client needs to add up more or less to the cost of your time to the company. And because of that, consultants quite often have to fill in time slips, time records. So say, today I spent 30 minutes on this, 2 hours on that, and so on and so forth. And one thing that I did for my own time monitoring is a dashboard that takes data from a spreadsheet on my computer, which is something that company wide we develop with our capacity plans. So, how much time each individual is going to spend on each project every month. And then I use the API of our time slip software to then tell me, say, I don't know, on project A, I'm supposed to spend 4 days this month. How much time have I logged on that project so far? And that is extremely helpful because it tells me if I want the project to stay as profitable as it is today, I can't spend more than that. So do I stop? Can I stop and do the rest next month? Or I can realize actually this project needs an extra 2 days this month. And how is that going to affect our financial position? So yeah, I have a dashboard. I can't share it for confidentiality reasons, but I have a dashboard that is extremely similar to this and based on the exact same principles and has the Claude chat embedded. Yeah, this is just to say these are very practical, real tools. It's not a demo for the sake of it.
So without digging too deeply, I don't want you to share anything that you can't in this world. So could you share, and again, stop me if you can't, all good, like what the use case was for?
You mean for my work dashboard?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's for managing essentially managing project profitability. So you need to make sure that you don't spend more time than you can afford on projects. And especially if you have a service mindset, which is very common in professional services, you would think that it's not that the client is always right, but if the client is unhappy, you've got a problem in that they're just not going to come back to you. And yeah, there you go, business fails. But in your endeavor to please the client and keep the client happy, you can go to considerable levels of depth and or feel like nothing is ever good enough. And you strive for perfection, and you can very easily spend 2, 3, 4, 5 days extra on a project. And that has, if you look at consultancy day rates, that has a huge financial impact on the project. And that's a financial impact that you can't charge the client for because the client has charged you for good enough. And if you've gone overboard and tried to do the best possible thing ever, then you've got to absorb those costs. So that is exactly the use case, making sure that you can assess how good is good enough and that you stop at the right time before your project has a negative impact on the company portfolio.
That's super interesting. I never thought about it like that. So basically, you have a client and you're restricted to a certain time period in terms of time management. And if you go over that time, then it's on you. And basically, it's on the company, basically. Right. That's what you're saying.
That's right. So to make it more concrete, say you've got a project to deliver between the 1st of July and the 31st of July 2026. The client is going to pay you $10,000 for that project, and you've allocated, I don't know, 5 days to do that project. So the client in the contract has agreed to pay 10,000 against a certain deliverable that you've specified. It could be, I don't know, a slide deck, whatever. Then if you spend 7 days instead of five, the client's not going to pay for that extra time unless you have explicitly agreed that they would. But in what I do, that is extremely uncommon. There are some types of consultancy where that is more common, but in what I do, things are paid for in that way, and usually the contract is the contract. And so, yeah, the company essentially is still paying my salary, and it's all about opportunity cost because if I spend those 2 days on making that deliverable perfect, it means that I've not spent those 2 days on another deliverable or another client project. And that's the cost of the opportunity in that if I had done that, I would have brought in another, I don't know, £4,000, for example, $4,000, we're saying. And so not only have I spent my time doing something that wasn't necessary because perfection is exceeds good enough, and usually clients don't want perfection. And yeah, so not only that, I could also have earned $4,000 more to the company in that month. So, yeah, it seems very tedious and peculiar, but if you multiply that across projects and for the whole project portfolio for the company and for a whole year, this can have a pretty devastating effect on the financial performance of the company.
Makes sense. This might be a little bit off topic, but I think it relates to what you're saying here. I've noticed recently in some of your notes on Substack that you've talked about like productivity and perfection and things like this also, and how now with AI in your hands, sometimes it's almost, I think, it's not a direct quote, but you were talking about basically like how it's harder to come down now from being so productive, right? It went from like how can people be more productive to now everybody is so productive. How do we like scale back from that and realize we don't have to always push too hard?
Yeah, no, I think there's been a big push for productivity with AI, and I think it's because it was the most visible outcome of generative AI. Because when generative AI first came out, people didn't really know what was it for. Because if you look at ChatGPT, Claude, or whatever else, we talked about this before. They're not products. Like they don't do anything. It's a chat. And it's like, you've made a very clever friend, but that's not a product or even a service. It's just a thing. And people had to start figuring out what do I use it for. And there was huge pressure to start implementing AI, embedding AI in services. And so I think most organizations have tried to realize efficiencies because I think it's fair to say that AI can generate lots of output very quickly and easily. And so organizations just started to do that. But then I think organizations now have started to realize that there's a price to pay for that. There are big trade offs in that you end up with lots and lots of output and not enough oversight and thinking. And if I'm stuck doing very rapidly, very efficiently with AI, I'm never stopping to think. And that is where the best ideas come from, where good strategy comes from, and also mental health, let's be honest, because nobody can be productive for the 100% of their working day. So, yeah, I think that there is quite a lot there. And I feel organizations are starting to do better now.
Yeah, awesome. I want to get into a few chats here, but before I do, just to wrap up this topic, like what's really the key takeaway here? What do you want people to take away from this conversation, especially for the people that joined in towards the end here? What should they take away?
So I would say that the main thing to keep in mind is that building something like this, building something real that makes a difference to your everyday job or everyday life, it is not complicated these days. And the link that I put shortly in the chat is a first step in that direction. So if you've never done any coding, modifying somebody else's code, and especially asking AI to modify somebody else's code, is a great way to get started. And there's a lot of talk around about reskilling and developing AI related skills. This is very much one of them. And this is a very simple setup. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in AI to just have a go. The easiest thing you can do is swap the city. Try to get AI to put your city instead of Rome. And then you can start messing around with lots of other things. Change the chart colors and play with it and see what breaks. But I think this is meant as a stepping stone for everybody to start playing with AI and with AI coding. And I think that's because that's where the understanding comes from. You need to play with it, engage with it. And yeah, that's in my experience, that's where the learning lives. So let me put the link to a Google Drive file in the chat. We will also be publishing an article on this alongside the YouTube video link in a few days' time. Yeah, if you missed the link from the chat, it will also be available on the auto asking question later in the week.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate you putting those articles together too. I think it's great because it wraps up everything we spoke about here. It'll link the actual YouTube video that will be posted from the stream, which is it's pretty much the entire stream. There's going to be obviously slight edits, but all the information will be there. I'm just going to link the YouTube channel in the chat as well. All of our previous streams are there as well as my streams with other creators. And yeah, so let's get into a few chats and then we'll wrap it up here. Let's see. This is a funny one. Ready for English said, no joke, when I flipped up my laptop just now, the weather app just appeared. Scary. Yeah, it's listening. It's odd how that happens sometimes. You're talking about something and then you open your phone and it's there. It's a little concerning. And he says, if you ask it controversial things, it will default to the programmed wording anyways. There's definitely some truth to that. I see Martin White, a few chats here. He definitely relates to this. And he said, I'm pretty sure he said he also uses Flask. And the legal field has good time management systems for sure. Dr. Linda Marie Noble, similar strategies to test taking, ROI and time investment. Move on to the next section or next project. At the same time, deep transformation can manifest from extraordinary effort that may be perceived initially as superfluous and goes back to the intention of use and merely efficiency that may be limiting. I think that's pretty much exactly what you were saying there, Andrea. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the point about the fact that sometimes deep transformation can manifest from extraordinary effort that was perceived as unnecessary before is a very good point. And actually, part of being able to part of managing my work efficiently, so the dashboard I built for myself for work, is also about making sure that I've got enough time for that potentially unnecessary thinking or going down rabbit holes. It's a sort of thing where you're not quite sure, is this going to work? Is this going to be useful? But you need to program that time in, because otherwise the whole firm's financial model will collapse unless you plan that accurately. And that's especially true for professional services firms. I think there was a question higher up from Martin as well that I thought was very relevant. Oh, yes. Yeah, this relates to a project I'm working on to make the local library catalog AI searchable. I wanted to pick up on that because this is exactly the sort of thing that you can do. So, if assuming the library catalog is made available through an API or a dataset as appropriate, then building a system that enables you to browse it and search it, visualize it in different ways, and then ask questions using AI is absolutely possible and is not dissimilar to what we saw today in practice.
absolutely. This is the art of asking questions with Andrea Chiarelli. I I really like this topic because it's it kind of just to put a bow on it, wrap it up. Like I think a lot of the times when people are using AI just on a very general base level, and you're using a chatbot and you're doing research, a lot of the times you're just looking at words just spat out at you. And a lot of people won't even go in and check or ask for references because if you don't ask for references, it's not going to give it to you. So I think if you actually have a dashboard set up and you're doing research, I'm a numbers guy and like numbers don't lie as long as your sources are correct. So main caveat, make sure your sources are correct. Juan says, could you share there it is, the Google Drive link again. So yeah, I think it's awesome because it's like our human brains and human eyes sometimes need to see nice graphs and charts and numbers. When you're doing research, I think it's really important. And I think the main takeaway from me from this, which is really special, is the real time data, which actually just comes back to again, like how are you setting up these systems and where are you getting your data from is really the main thing for me here.
Yeah, 100%. I think, yeah, the subject of data provenance is probably the single most important point here, in that you can build the most sophisticated, beautiful sort of visual set of visualization or analysis engine. But then if your data is poor quality, then your thinking following that is going to be poor quality. So yeah, I think, yeah, you make a very good point about always making sure that you know where the information is from. So whether it's references. So well, actually, one other thing that I've done in a similar way to this is building topic maps. So so if you put in source information, so say a number of articles or reports or documents, and then obviously you need to have the right to copy them. So yeah, just don't do anything illegal on my advice. But yeah, if you put information that you have access to lawfully, you can then create topic maps. And that's something I've done a lot of. So you can show what topics appear in multiple documents and how are those connected, or what topics are more or less popular. So yeah, I think there are so many opportunities here, genuinely.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think we did a good job here with this topic. Thank you, Andrea, as usual. I'm the student, you're the teacher here. I'm glad to keep it that way. I'm always willing to learn. Every day I'm learning more. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I think it's been a great conversation. Oh, sorry, let's just answer that
Sure.
final question. Yes, you can do this in the 365 ecosystem, but you need to set up your API in the Azure dashboard and get an admin to approve the workflow. So it's not that easy, but I do it and it does work. It's just a bit trickier than this dashboard. Sorry for the interruption, but yeah, no, it's been a
All good.
great conversation. Thanks for having me here as ever, Leo.
All good. Not an interruption at all. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for everybody here in the chat as well. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.